What is happening, everybody? It is Thursday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and as I usually do Thursday right afternoon, is we break down the upcoming DraftKings Reignmakers slate. We look at Thursday Night Football. We look at the main slate. We try to figure out the best players to purchase on the secondary market, and whatever else you guys have on your mind you want to ask me about, the chat is open. You guys could ask any questions you would like, and I'll be answering them. So anything from who to play on Thursday Night Football or any of the other primetime slates, to any other general football DFS questions or fantasy football in general, throw it into the YouTube chat. Could answer those over the course of the show. The only thing that I ask of you in return is just to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you've not done that already. And also, we're sponsored here by DraftKings Reignmakers. If you guys want to check out Reignmakers, the best place to start is with the free starters pack. There's a link for that below. You're going to get a totally free set of players to start your collection with. You can win actual cash prizes with it, and that's it. There's no catch. So if you want to get in on the action, there's no better starting point than for free. So go check that out if you guys have not already. Now, if you guys, like I said, have any questions, throw those into the YouTube chat, and we could definitely start answering those. If not, I'm going to start by looking at the Thursday Night Football game today, which, listen, it's not the best one in the world on paper. We've got the Bears, we've got the Panthers, but there are some interesting angles for both classic contests as well as Reignmakers, and this is probably one of the easiest primetime games to be contrarian on, because how can you have a consensus feeling on who the best players are to roster in this game? This is not the prettiest game on paper. So let's start by looking at Thursday Night Football and seeing who it is that's projecting the best for us and who we want to be targeting by a number of different things, right? We could look at the secondary market prices. We could look at the player projections, and that's where we're going to start. So I've got Thursday Night Football pulled up here, and this is our totally free Reignmakers tool that we have over at stochastic.com. If you guys would like to check this out, go to stochastic.com and just go to our projections. This is a free page that you find. It's got our projections for all the players as well as what the secondary market prices are. So you could use that to find who the players are best to target on that secondary market. And, you know, it's funny because we just saw a change in terms of which players are designated with the superstar status. And you can only play one superstar per lineup. So Adam Thielen recently got the superstar status. And I was thinking, well, when am I ever going to play Adam Thielen now that he's a superstar? Well, it doesn't matter on a primetime game against another team that doesn't have a superstar in the Panthers. So Adam Thielen is probably the biggest no-brainer play that we have in this game. Things get definitely murky behind him, but we do have Adam Thielen projected for 16.68 fantasy points. The next closest projection in this game is Bryce Young at 13.89. And also something to keep in mind, I'm fairly sure, I'm going to double check this is the case, but the Bears quarterback, I'm pretty sure we only have Fields available for Reignmakers purposes. Double checking the marketplace to make sure there were no other cards added. So let's see. If we go into the contest lobby, the easiest way is just use the filters. You could search just Thursday. And yeah, so with Justin Fields being the only Bears quarterback that's available, we don't have a quarterback to play from the Bears, which makes it even thinner in terms of trying to find some of the guys to get to. And even we could consider playing defenses for Reignmakers today. And don't forget that, oh, good point, by the way. Brandon said that DJ Moore is a superstar. I did mess that up. I forgot that DJ Moore is also a superstar now. So we have DJ Moore and Adam Thielen to play as superstars. And to me, Adam Thielen's pretty clearly the better choice of the two. Thank you for the correction, Brandon. So DJ Moore project for 11.9 fantasy points. Adam Thielen we have for 16.68. So there being a 5 fantasy point gap between the two of them, I think you're pretty clearly leaning towards Thielen as the guy to go to. And also, it's not like you're paying that much more for him relatively. The core floor price for Adam Thielen, $5.50 compared to DJ Moore at $3.90. So with that being the case, like I'd much rather pay the extra $1.60 to get an Adam Thielen if you're buying a player on the secondary market. And now there just are not very many games where you're going to see this kind of low projections. And part of it is because the Bears quarterback with Justin Fields out is not in the Reignmakers player pool. So we've got Adam, if you're just building lineups like purely off optimal projections that we have at stochastic.com, you would be playing a lineup of Adam Thielen in the captain spot, Bryce Young as one of the flex plays, Deontay Foreman is one of the flex plays, and then Chuba Hubbard as one of them as well. So not like the highest projected fantasy lineup you'll ever see in these games. Now, if you wanted to be really contrarian, like in that sense, maybe you could make a case for DJ Moore over Adam Thielen, but I don't think that's the place to really get contrarian because, like we were talking about before, it's a 5 fantasy point gap between the two of them. So here's where I think it's more reasonable to be contrarian. I think you go to somebody like a Jonathan Mingo or a Cole Kmet and play them in a lineup over the likes of like a Deontay Foreman or potentially Bryce Young. Because while Bryce Young is a quarterback, so he's just going to have a fantasy point projection a lot higher than other players in this game, 13.89 fantasy points, Bryce Young sucks. He has looked terrible so far this year. He is a very clear downside. He is by no means a lock to be one of the 4 highest scoring players in the game. So I think that one of the 2 ways you could be contrarian is don't play Bryce Young in a lineup. Instead of playing Bryce Young, go ahead and play somebody like Cole Kmet or Chuba Hubbard in a lineup over him. Or you could play somebody who's not Adam Thielen in the captain spot. You could play a defense as well. And one thing that is kind of fun to exploit some of these showdown contests is you could play the same defense multiple times with different defense players. So if you took, like a Bears defensive lineman, a Bears cornerback, you could play the Bears defense multiple times in the same lineup. And let's say you're fading Bryce Young in a lineup and you're playing the Bears defense twice with 2 different defensive players, you could get into a situation where, maybe Bryce Young throws a pick 6 and you're actually getting 2 touchdowns credit to your lineup for that. So I think that's one way that it doesn't always make sense to play these primetime games because often they're not god-awful, terrible, shitty teams, but they are in this case. So that's why I think that this is a game where, especially Bryce Young, who's going to be super, super popular in these Reignmaker showdown contests, I think doing like stacks of the Bears defense is a reasonable way to create upside and be contrarian. But let me know if you guys agree with that at all, if you feel differently. I know that when I was building lineups in our Sims tool and contest generator at stochastic.com for the classic contest, I was getting to a bunch of exposure to the defenses, honestly, more so on the Panther side than the Bears side. But still, if you're looking at how this individual game sets up and how the ownership is going to look for showdown, I do think that there's a really strong case to be made for Bears defense stacks. Other than that, if we're looking at the projections here, there is a drop-off after some of the players here. So we've got Mingo for 8.29 fantasy points, Mooney for 8.09, Roschon Johnson, 7.8. Of all these players, the one who I'm most apt to roster is Mingo, particularly if you wanted to use him as a pivot off of Adam Thielen. Thielen's had just a fantastic season, and I haven't really bought into it entirely, but now we're halfway through the season, and is he going to be as good in the second half of the season he was in the first half of the season? Most likely not, but it doesn't mean he's going to suck or anything like that. But if you did want to build a lineup where you didn't play Adam Thielen and maybe went with DJ Moore, I would recommend playing Jonathan Mingo in that lineup because one of the scenarios where Adam Thielen fails, let's say probably 2 main scenarios Thielen fails. One, he just has a bad game, gets hurt, something like that. Or Jonathan Mingo is a big game and just gathers more of the target share in this game. So if that ends up being the case, that's how I could see Jonathan Mingo being a high score and maybe Adam Thielen not having the best fantasy game. But other than that, I don't have a whole ton to add about Thursday Night Football. This is not the best game from a viewer perspective, but very good for fantasy purposes. I think there's a lot of interesting ways to be contrarian. Let's look at the main slate now. And how I always like to start looking at the main slate is by looking at the projections that we have in our top stacks tool. So this is one of the premium tools that we have over at stochastic.com is our top stacks tool. What you can do with this is you look at each team's odds of being the highest scoring team on the slate. So the team over the weekend on the Sunday main slate that we have with the best odds of being the highest scoring team, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals, 17.6% chance to be the highest scoring team on the slate. We finally got Joe Burrow healthy and looking really good. And then followed by the Dallas Cowboys, 13.8%. We've got Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb have just crushed the last few weeks. And then beyond that, we've got the Detroit Lions going up against the Chargers, then the Chargers against the Lions. So this game makes a lot of sense as a game stack. We'll look at the potential options for that. But then there's a really big drop-off before you get to the 49ers, only a 5.7% chance to be the top scoring team. So these are the 4 teams that I really want to be focused and building on. Chargers, Lions, Cowboys, Bengals. But we will start with the Bengals and seeing what looks good for them. So if you go and you're using this tool, you can click on teams and then filter by the Bengals. That's the easiest way to isolate teams. And Joe Burrow, to me, is pretty clearly the top quarterback option this weekend. does not have the superstar status. We have a tag for that here. He's also projected for 24.66 fantasy points. Massive projection that we have on Joe Burrow. And if we look at all of the quarterbacks on every team, here's the difference between Joe Burrow and the other quarterbacks. And I'll sort it by the main slate. So we filter Josh Allen out. And you'll see Joe Burrow project for 24.66, followed by Dak Prescott at 24.07. So between the two of them, all right, there isn't that big of a fantasy difference, although there is a slightly cheaper price point on Joe Burrow. And then you get Jared Goff, who's next, and he is projected for about 3 fantasy points less than Joe Burrow, 2.5 fantasy points less than Dak Prescott. So Joe Burrow is the guy who who do I want to play? If I can only pick one, I'm going to be going with Joe Burrow for this weekend. Also, very helpful, he doesn't have the superstar status. As you scroll down a little bit, you see Justin Herbert, who's a potential option. He is a superstar. And if you guys have watched the show before, I don't like to burn a superstar spot on the quarterback on most slates. But let's get back to the Bengals, and we'll look at Jamar Chase most likely and figuring out, is that where we want to go with our stack? So Joe Burrow project for 24.66 fantasy points. Low floor asking price 674 than Jamar Chase. 22.85 fantasy point projection. His core floor asking price is $4.50. Very affordable. And as you get to this point in the season, because, the deeper you get into the year, the less slates there are available. The cards get cheaper and cheaper. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But still, Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase is only about $10 to make this stack. So very affordable. And then if you want to throw T. Higgins into this and make it a double stack, T. Higgins projected for 15.09 fantasy points. His core floor asking price only $1.89. So a lot of really good options to get to from the Bengals. The question now becomes with Jamar Chase is this the player we want to use our superstar spot on this weekend? My initial intuition is yes. But let's look at all the superstars to be sure, because at first glance, Burrow to Jamar Chase does look like the best stack that we have available. All right, go to all the superstars. Select yes. And so here is the difference. We've got Jamar Chase here, project for 22.85 fantasy points, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown, project for 22.14. However, Amon-Ra St. Brown has a core floor price of $9.66. Jamar Chase is $4.50. So if you could only pick one of these guys to use, we've got a similar projection, slightly higher on Jamar Chase, about a half fantasy point higher, but he's half the price. So to me, Jamar Chase, pretty easy choice over Amon-Ra St. Brown. Chase is banged up, so we need to be sure that he's going to be in the lineup. But assuming he is, which I think he's more likely to play than not, I like Jamar Chase over Amon-Ra St. Brown. By the way, shout out to OMG Lols in the YouTube chat. He said, what's up? So what's up, OMG Lols? And don't forget, guys, if you have any questions for me as I'm going through this, or if there's just something you want me to talk about, throw it into the YouTube chat. I can answer any questions you have. So we're looking at superstars back here. Top projected one is Jamar Chase for the main slate, followed by Amon-Ra St. Brown due to the discrepancy in price. I think Chase looks like a better option. Then we've got Justin Herbert, but he's about a fantasy point projected less. He also has the superstar status at quarterback. When there's quarterbacks that are non-superstars that project better than him, hard for me to prioritize Justin Herbert. Same deal here with Lamar Jackson at the QB spot. I do think there's a case to be made for Christian McCaffrey, and we'll talk a little bit more about him and the running backs, but still, my overall preference here is going to be playing Jamar Chase. And then another thing that while the projection is solid on Christian McCaffrey, and running back's been much harder to roster in 2023 than it's been in previous years. We just don't have the same amount of workhorse backs that we've had in the past. Christian McCaffrey's core floor price is $14.50. He's 3 times more expensive than Jamar Chase. You're getting much more bang for your buck on Chase. And you'll really see that as well if you look at our points per dollar projections. So what we're doing here is it's just what is the player's fantasy projection divided by their secondary market price. So very similar to if you guys are playing, a main slate DraftKings contest, just what is the player's points expected to be divided by their salary to figure out value. Same sort of situation with this. So points per dollar, you're getting 5.08 for Jamar Chase, whereas points per dollar on Christian McCaffrey, you're only getting 1.28 relative to what their price is on the secondary market. So much better bang for your buck getting Jamar Chase. So I think that Jamar Chase to Joe Burrow combination, if you have it in your collection, play it this weekend. It looks really good going up against the Houston Texans. And let's look on the other side of the game if there are any Texans players that make sense as a run back in stacks. My intuition is no, because there's no salary cap in Reignmakers, but maybe there's somebody who's projecting really well for us. All right, so Houston Texans, CJ Stroud, projected for 18.59 fantasy points. Solid. Not someone I'm going to be looking to play a quarterback for this particular slate. And then if you look at his pass catchers, I think the opportunity cost is too great to play like a Nico Collins or a Tank Dell. Here's the reason why. Without any salary cap, if you're playing somebody like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, it means it's coming at the opportunity cost of playing a non-superstar wide receiver that's going to be projecting extremely better. If we look at all of the wide receivers for the slate, not just on Houston, we have the highest projection on Keenan Allen, 22.87, followed by Jamar Chase, 22.85, CeeDee Lamb, who's no longer a superstar, 22.24. So, I mean, these guys are projecting like 10 fantasy points higher than Nico Collins, Tank Dell. So, I like being able to correlate my lineups, but there's a point in time where that correlation doesn't offset the dip in what projections are going to be. So if I'm going to make like a really hardcore Bengals stack, I'd rather go to Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase than Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and say like a Tank Dell or Nico Collins. So no run backs for me that I really like on the Houston side. Let's go and look at the next team here. Dallas Cowboys taking on the New York Giants. And let's see what we have for Dallas this weekend. Go all positions. Let's go Dallas. And how good has CeeDee Lamb been lately? The funniest thing about CeeDee Lamb is that he really struggled to start the year, which is why he lost his superstar status on Reignmakers. And what happens as soon as he loses superstar status? He becomes the highest scoring fantasy player like in all of DFS over the last couple of weeks. So CeeDee Lamb has become insanely more valuable now by losing out on that superstar status. Of every single quarterback we have on the slate, because we were looking at this before, Dak Prescott only projects behind Joe Burrow. Only one. The only wide receiver that CeeDee Lamb projects behind, well, two of them actually, are Keenan Allen and Jamar Chase. And then you got CeeDee Lamb behind him, but CeeDee Lamb doesn't have the superstar status. So you could build lineups with both Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb in it. So maybe you guys don't have a Joe Burrow card. You don't want to buy one, but you're already holding a Dak Prescott card. Absolutely no issue with going with the Dak Prescott CeeDee Lamb stack. At this point, I'm just not very high on Tony Pollard. Time and time again, he has failed this year. I don't think he's the same player this year that he was the last couple of years. It's a bummer because he's the workhorse back in Dallas. They finally got rid of Zeke Elliott, but it's a year too late. Tony Pollard is not a guy who I view as being able to handle a real workhorse type workload and stay healthy. He hurt his leg, broken leg at the tail end of last year. Has been really inefficient this year, averaging sub 4 yards per carry. So Tony Pollard, if you're playing him and you have a card of him, like, I mean, I guess it's okay, but I'm not going out of my way to play Tony Pollard in Reignmakers. Haven't gone out of my way to play him in DFS pretty regularly. If you guys watch the tournament strategy show that I do with Neil Orfield, we talk about wanting to be underweight to the field on Tony Pollard. So eventually, I'm sure he's going to have a big game. If he's ever going to have a big game, the matchup against the Giants could not be more favorable on paper. We've got Tommy DeVito starting a QB for the Giants. This team's a train wreck. They're terrible. So it's a really favorable game script for Tony Pollard. And it's still hard for me to go out and say I want to buy a Tony Pollard core card for $5 or a Tony Pollard rare card for $21. He just hasn't put up that kind of ceiling enough this year, but he still gets really popular in DFS. He remains really expensive on the secondary market for Reignmakers relative to other players. So hard for me to prioritize Tony Pollard. I'd rather go after the Cowboys passing game with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. All right, let's go ahead and look at the other game that we could potentially make stacks of, and that is the Detroit Lions and the LA Chargers. So we've got the Lions a 10.1% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate, and then the Chargers 9.5% chance. So of these three teams that we've talked about here, they make up about 50% of the chance of being the highest scoring team of the week. 17% to the Bengals, 13% to the Cowboys. That makes up right there 31% when you include everything. And then these two, another 20%. So yeah, like 50% chance that we're going to get the Bengals, Cowboys, Lions, or Chargers as the highest scoring team this weekend. So let's go back here, filter by the Chargers and by the Lions, Detroit, and the Chargers. Let's look at all the players here. All right, so if we're looking through everything that we have here by projections, By the way, why is Austin Eckler not showing up? Where's Eckler? Oh, do I have, no? Huh. Well, it looks like Eckler is missing for some reason from our projections. Don't know why that's the case, but that aside, we'll look at the other players that are available here in this game. He's not on the second. Oh, he is. Okay, never mind. All right, we just don't have Eckler projected very well this week. I thought he's missing from the front page, but it's because he's only projected for 14.84 fantasy points. So Eckler is somebody who, without the superstar tag now, I'm not projecting super well for us, 14.84 fantasy points, which means what? I'd rather play the passing game from the Chargers. We've got Keenan Allen projected for 22.87 fantasy points. Also, a nice benefit to Keenan Allen. His core floor price is $8.98, whereas Austin Eckler, who I was really surprised there to see how low we have him projected, 14.84 fantasy points. His low floor price is $9.67. So not a massive difference in price between the two of them, but we're looking at an 8 fantasy point difference between the two, while Austin Eckler is slightly more expensive. So if I'm building lineups around the Chargers, yeah, I'd much rather be built around Keenan Allen than around Austin Eckler. And then as for the quarterbacks in this game, we actually have Jared Goff projected for slightly more fantasy points than Justin Herbert. And in addition to that, Goff does not have the superstar status. Justin Herbert does. The problem with Goff, though, is that if you wanted to pair him with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a superstar, and I'd rather be using my superstar spot elsewhere than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you could go Goff to Brown, but I would rather use my superstar spot on Jamar Chase than Amon-Ra St. Brown. So with that in mind, my preferred way to target this game is going to be through Keenan Allen than it is through Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then as for Justin Herbert, same issue where he has the superstar status. Like, there are ways that you could stack this game, but unfortunately, with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Justin Herbert both having the superstar status, it's kind of weird to the point where it's like, all right, if I'm going Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, like, you could include Keenan Allen as well, but it does suck a little bit when two players in the game both have superstar status. It's hard to make a stack with Justin Herbert and the Chargers and have a run back from the Lions because Amon-Ra St. Brown has that superstar status. As for other players in this game that we could look at, Eckler, too expensive for me on the secondary market. Let's see, what is Sam Laporta's core floor price? $388. So I don't think that Sam Laporta is all that important for the Sunday main slate. But if you guys play the deep slate contest that lock on Thursday, lock today, where you have to play tight end, Sam Laporta, really excellent choice. Project for 14.9 fantasy points, core floor price $388. So he's somebody who I think would be really cool, or not really cool, really good. I don't know why I said cool. That sounded really stupid. He's somebody who I think would be a really valuable piece to build game stacks around with Sam Laporta. So you could go Sam Laporta and then have Keenan Allen on the other side for the deep slate contest. And I think that's a pretty good way to build out some lineups. Let's go position by position now. And once again, if you guys have any questions, throw them into the YouTube chat and we could answer them. Turn these tags off. And this is also just going to be useful information for you guys if you are playing the regular main slate contests for DraftKings, just to see what we have as projections on players right now. So at QB, the highest projected for the weekend, as we saw before, was Joe Burrow, projected for 24.66 fantasy points, followed by Dak Prescott. So if we can only play one QB this week, the answer is pretty clearly going to be Joe Burrow, especially because he's not a superstar. And there's a drop-off once we get past Dak and Joe Burrow. Then you get 3 fantasy points lower to Jared Goff, followed by Justin Herbert, who I wouldn't be considering because he has a superstar status. Then you've got Geno Smith, Lamar Jackson, also a superstar. So nothing else really here that's worth talking about too much. If we get to the running backs now. Highest projected running back on the slate is Christian McCaffrey, followed by Tony Pollard. And I just don't really like going after Tony Pollard, like I mentioned before, just because of how much he struggled this year. If there was going to be a week you play him, I guess it would be this one. But really, my preferred option at running back, all things being considered, is going to be Joe Mixon here. Joe Mixon talked about liking Bengals stacks. We also see Joe Burrow targeting Joe Mixon at times in the passing game. So I think that's another really clever way to include the Bengals as part of a stack. Is you go Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon, or you could use Joe Mixon as a standalone piece outside of a team stack. And I think you're getting a lot of upside there. Joe Mixon hasn't really seen a lot of touchdown equity this year. But remember last year, Joe Mixon also kind of had a weak fantasy season. Then he had that one game midway through where, what was his stat line from that game? Joe Mixon had a game where he rushed for like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. It just totally broke his slate. It accounted for like a third of his fantasy points on the entire season. Let me see if I could find that game that I'm talking about. So far this year, Mixon has 490 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. Joe Mixon's game log from last year. Here it is. Yeah, the game against the Panthers. So all of last year, Joe Mixon, the entire year, had 4 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving, 7 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns. In this one game against the Panthers, he had 153 rushing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns, and then he also had 58 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown. So we had one game with over 200 yards and 5 touchdowns. I'm not saying to you that that's what Joe Mixon is going to do this game. What I am saying is that he is a running back that is extremely erratic. He only had 100-yard rushing game all of last year. He only had one game all of last year with multiple touchdowns, and he scored 5 in it. This is a player who could spike a lot of upside, kind of separated from the results from the rest of the year. So I think this is a good spot for Joe Mixon against the Houston Texans defense, and I like including him as a part of game stacks, and he's also one of my favorite running backs to play in Reignmakers this weekend. ETN is superstar status. That's going to make him hard for me to consider. Derrick Henry, pretty interesting option. I really thought the Titans were going to trade him at the deadline. They didn't end up doing it. They held on to him. He lost his superstar status, which I thought he was going to hold on to his superstar status even with the slow start because running back hasn't been the most prolific position this year. So I'd say those are probably my 2 favorite running backs to target as non-superstars for this weekend. Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry. If you wanted to use a superstar on a running back, Christian McCaffrey is pretty clearly the guy, but he's very expensive on the secondary market. $14.50 is his core floor asking price. That's more than I would want to spend on a McCaffrey midway through the season. Now we'll look at wide receivers, and then that will bring us to the end of the show. And if you guys haven't done yet, do me a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps keep all of our content free around here. Now, if we're looking at the wide receivers, we've got a lot of players that are projecting pretty well here. At the top of the list is Keenan Allen, who has not performed quite as well without Mike Williams as I thought he was going to, because we saw Keenan Allen get off to just a torrid start to the season, massive targets, massive receptions. Now defense have been able to really focus in on him a little bit more. Hasn't helped Quentin Johnston at all. I have a bunch of Quentin Johnston in best ball. I don't know if you guys played best ball and drafted him also. Massive disappointment. Probably my biggest miss in the teams that I've drafted this year. But Keenan Allen's still somebody who I really like the upside of, especially in this matchup against the Lions. It should be a really high-scoring game. So if you guys have a Keenan Allen, you're certainly playing him. And then also, his core floor asking price, not all that substantial, $8.98. So I think Keenan Allen's a good piece to be building around this weekend. Jamar Chase, he's my favorite superstar to play on the slate. We've talked about him over the course of the show. And then some other wide receivers. If you guys want to take a chance on somebody with a lot of upside that isn't all that expensive, we've got Mike Evans in here, projected for about 17.5 fantasy points, taking on the Tennessee Titans, core floor price of less than $4. If you're making a mini game stack, I talked about liking Derrick Henry at running back. I like Mike Evans at wide receiver as well. Baker Mayfield's been serviceable for the Buccaneers this year. They are very, very live to win the NFC South, which not because it's how good the Bucs are, it's because every single team in that division is terrible. It's slightly better of division than it was last year, which is not saying much. But Mike Evans, Derrick Henry, I think it's a decent looking mini game stack. Then if we look at some other players in here, we've got, where is T. Higgins? Yeah, T. Higgins projected for right around 15 fantasy points for us with a core floor price of $1.89. He's another piece if you want to be different and build Bengal stacks that I do think makes sense to include as part of that. So that is going to do it for us this weekend. We've gone through the main slate. We talked about Thursday Night Football as well and the thrilling game between the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears. If you guys want more information on that game tonight, check out Live Before Lock. We got Dave Locker, and then we got Neil Orfield breaking down the game from 7:15 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. So check those guys out if you want more information. Other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck tonight, and I will see you back here next week, same time.